This is Everybody Pulls the Tarp with your host, Andrew Moses. Each week, Andrew talks with Olympians, pro athletes, TV stars, Grammy winners, best-selling authors, CEOs, and other high performers to uncover their success secrets.
My guest is Washington Commanders running back Austin Ekeler.
Every day we write a page of our life. The best thing is you have the pen in your hand.
Three-time Olympic gold medalist Tessa Virtue. Welcome back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Thanks for thinking of me, and I'm a big fan of the podcast and of yours. So anytime you text or call, I'm here.
Mike Mills from REM.
The key to that was realizing at some point fairly early on that this was probably our life's work.
Every conversation is jam-packed with inspiration and actionable ideas.
My guest is 2023 WNBA Coach of the Year, Stephanie White.
The hardest thing for a coach is trying to prioritize how much time you put in one area or another.
Former MLB player, coach, and manager Clint Hurdle.
That is the best title of any podcast out there in America, and the content matches up to it. Andrew, you do a fantastic job. I'm a big fan. Keep up the great work.
World-renowned organizing expert Shira Gill.
You can improve your life simply by removing things.
Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the techniques, processes, and mindsets powering the world's most successful people.
Let's go. Hi, friends, and welcome back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. This week, I am excited to welcome longtime baseball writer Ken Davidoff back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. Well, listeners, for over 30 years, Ken lived his childhood dream of being a sports writer. But a few years ago, in 2022, at the age of 50, Ken decided that he was ready for a change. He stepped down from his role as a daily sports writer after years as a baseball writer for iconic publications, including the New York Post, Newsday, and others. And today, he is an adjunct professor at Endicott College outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and involved in a variety of different projects. Ken is now the co-author of the new book, 101 Lessons From The Dugout, What Baseball and Softball Can Teach Us About the Game of Life. The book was recently released back on February 5th. Ken co-authored the book with retired pediatrician Dr. Harley Rotbart, and the foreword to the book is written by one of my favorite baseball players of all time, New York Mets legend David Wright, whose remarkable baseball career was unfortunately cut short by severe back issues. So let me get my latest conversation with Ken all set up for you. Ken was first a guest here on the podcast back in early 2021. Back then, we explored his career in journalism, and Ken pulled back the curtain on the day-to-day grind of life as a sports writer and how he does his work. But that conversation applied far beyond journalism and sports writing. It was filled with important life and career lessons about the power of hard work, building trusted relationships, attention to detail, thinking creatively, and so much more. Now, in this week's conversation, we do a deep dive on Ken's decision to walk away from the job he dreamed about having as a kid. I asked him how he knew he was burnt out and needed to make a change, what went into making such a bold and decisive career pivot, and how and when he knew that he had ultimately made the right move. We also explore Ken's new book, which, as I mentioned moments ago, is called 101 Lessons From The Dugout, What Baseball and Softball Can Teach Us About the Game of Life. Over the course of Ken's career as a baseball writer, Ken had a front row seat on a daily basis to watch players, managers, coaches, and others around baseball perform their craft. His new book distills what he learned about baseball, softball, and life in general into 101 simple, digestible life lessons that all of us need to hear. I can't wait for you to hear my latest conversation with Ken. This one has something for everyone, and I hope you take away as much from this conversation as I have. Oh, and one more thing. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. So, let's pull the tarp and get straight to Ken Davidoff. Where I want to begin, I want to do a little bit of a life update. You lived your childhood dream of being a sports writer for over 30 years, but at the age of 50, back in 2022, you decided that you were ready for a change. You stepped down from your work of daily sports writing and beat writing after 30 plus years at Newsday, New York Post, and more. Ken, what went into that decision and the timing? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, Andrew, I had just, as you just said, childhood dream, 7 years old. I want to cover the New York Yankees. That's what I want to do with my life. And I was very blessed to have achieved that goal. But when I hit 50, and really a couple of years before, I started talking about my wife. I was working harder than ever because of the demands of the job kept evolving and getting worse. And I wasn't enjoying it as much. And it reached a point where I kind of just like dreaded going to the stadium to do the job. And my wife, Sarah, said to me, if you don't like this job, then stop doing this job. Because, you know, like she was basically like a baseball writer widow for 25 years, alone on weekends and tons of my travels. Like, I'd like to have you home. So that's when I made the decision in early 22 to shut it down, you know, to get off the hamster wheel and try something different.
What was it specifically, Ken, that you had identified that you said, like, I just don't love what I'm doing anymore?
It was really, Andrew, it was the day-to-day grind. Like, I had many hats as a baseball columnist for the New York Post. I wrote feature stories. I expected to break some news. You know, we podcasting, with video, many elements. But the fundamental element was write a column today about the Yankees or Mets. You know, and usually it was what's wrong with the Yankees and Mets. And I had grown to loathe that fundamental element of the job. You know, like, oh, I got to, again, break down what's wrong with the Yankees and Mets. If you hate the fundamental part of your job, then it's pretty tough to pull it off. So I felt like I was doing a disservice to the New York Post readers and to myself.
There are countless people listening, Ken, that are contemplating a change. Maybe it's a change in their personal lives, a change in their professional trajectory. They're thinking about something. You talked about conversations with your wife, some of the encouragement that she gave you. Talk about that moment that you knew for sure that you were going to decisively do this. And then I'm curious to see how quickly after you did it, did you feel like you were sure it was the right decision?
Well, look, there were some practical elements in play in terms of talking to an attorney and running some numbers. But I think my true aha moment, I remember it was the 2021 season. So after 2020 not being, well, I'm sorry, we were in the press box, but separated and no fans in the stands with COVID. So 2021 was some semblance of normalcy. By the end of that season, there were full crowds in the stands and we don't have to wear masks anymore. But there's a wonderful gentleman. His name is Laurel Priebe, and he is actually the son-in-law of Bud Selig, longtime former commissioner. And Laurel loves baseball more than anyone you'll ever meet. He was the traveling secretary for the World Series champion 1987 Twins, just a positive, upbeat person. And he was living in New York at the time and would often just come to the press box and do a little bit of work and before a game. And I saw him one day at Yankee Stadium, and he said to me, like, how's it going, Ken? I said, it's going fine, Laurel, just dealing with this garbage again. You know, just like waving at the field. And I could tell, like, Laurel was taken aback. Like, garbage? Like, I love baseball. What are you talking about? Like, you know, Laurel's always polite, and we're still good friends. So, but I could use, oh, garbage, really? Okay. So that's when, like, the light bulb went over my head. Like, there's someone else out there who deserves this job more than me if I am that cynical about what I'm doing.
On that note a little bit, Ken, just to dig a little deeper, was there ever any point where you said to yourself, oh my goodness, young child Ken Davidoff would think I am nuts for flippantly waving my hand towards the field and saying, I've got to write another story about this garbage. I can't believe I'm here. I'm feeling like withdrawn from this profession. I'm contemplating just stepping aside from this and relinquishing this role that, like, was there ever a moment that you're like 8, 9, 10-year-old Ken would think I'm nuts right now?
I really didn't look at it that way. And for sure, 8, 9, 10-year-old was Kenny. So because everyone from my life at that point still calls me Kenny, which is fine. But just funny you mentioned that. But no, I felt like 8, 9, 10-year-old Kenny would be proud of me because I achieved that life goal. But 8, 9, 10-year-old Kenny wasn't saying you have to do this until you're 65.
How quickly after did you exhale and say, I made the right decision? Because there's like two parts to every decision.
I have to say, Andrew, it was pretty instant. I mean, I informed my boss, Chris Shaw, with the New York Post, who I still have a great relationship with, best boss I ever had. So I informed him, I would say January 20th. My contract was up. When was my contract up? It was up February 1st, I think, of 2022. But it wasn't a big deal for it to go that deep into it. I never had a problem renewing. But I went to the New York Post building on Avenue of the Americas, met and said, Chris, I'm done. Like, I'm just stepping down. I'm not going to a competitor. I'm just done. And so we kept that on the DL for a few weeks. And then it was like early February where I put it on social media. And Chris and I coordinated. It goes like 7 p.m. one night. Like, he put out the email to the Post. I put it on my social media. And just the reaction I got was so overwhelmingly positive. I mean, some people wondered if I was dying, and, many people just figured I'd been fired. But people who knew me best were just like, good for you. Like, it is such a grind. Good for you. And then the interesting outreach came immediately. I mean, as I'm speaking to you, I'm at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts, where I'm an adjunct professor, and maybe we'll delve more deeply into that later. But the offer to teach here came, I believe, 2 days after I put out on social media that I'm leaving this business. So I really there were 2 columns that I wish I could have written since I stopped working over 4 years. So you do the math, we're talking about 1,400 days. So 2 of those days I had some regrets that, I wish I could have written a column today. But the other 1,398 days, I felt pretty good.
Okay, now I have to ask Ken, what were the 2 columns that you wish you had an opportunity to write?
Well, one was the passing Willie Mays, which was 2024, because Willie was my dad's favorite player. I got to meet Willie when I was 7 years old in 1978. I just would have really enjoyed writing about that and the close bond I felt with him because of my dad. And then the other one, you're a Mets fan, so 2022, Edwin Diaz goes down in the World Baseball Classic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I was an early skeptic of the WBC. I covered the very first one in 2006. Kudos to the WBC. They're an enormous success. I mean, you look now at the Team USA roster for the one that's going to be played, it's remarkable. The pitchers used to want no part of that. Now they've got Skeens and Skubal. Aaron Judge is aboard. So my only quibble at this point is I do think if a player gets injured at the WBC, because he still gets, like Diaz, season-ending injury, he got his money. Steve Cohen got a full rebate on that salary because there's a separate insurance policy for the WBC. Sure. I'd just like to see the fans get a little love. Fans who bought Mets tickets that year get an acknowledgement. It was 2023, right? I'm sorry, not 22, 23. Yeah, because I was Bucks last year managing.
Yes.
So then these fans buy a ticket, and the value of that ticket is diminished because the best closer in the world isn't going to pitch for them because he got hurt doing something, risking injury on another venture where, again, there was insurance in place for everyone besides the fans. So those are the 2 columns I wish I could have written.
Very interesting, Ken. I surely would have loved to have read both of those. In particular, the Willie Mays one. The Edwin Diaz one was too close to home as a Mets fan. That was difficult to wake up to. I believe it happened late in the evening and woke up to that news and immediately felt like it was, here we go again. Here we go again. Life as a Mets fan. So, Ken, you used the word a few minutes ago, grind. And we talked about this a little bit in the first conversation we had way back a few years ago. But one of the things that I love about baseball as a fan is the grind, is that it's like life. It's every day. It's up and down. You're rarely your best. You're rarely your worst. There are so many lessons that teaches us and that you talk about in your book that we're going to get into in a minute. But talk about the grind, just for people that don't have an appreciation. Like, what does the grind look like for a journalist who covers the game of baseball?
It is absolutely a grind. And I just saw David Cohn a few weeks ago. Actually, Bernie Williams played at Carnegie Hall. And I was saying, like, David, my lifestyle wasn't that dissimilar to yours. Just my salary was a lot lower, and he agreed, because we were everywhere. But yeah, it's basically, say, for a typical night game, you're probably working all day leading up to, when you wake up at 7, if there's breaking news, you're dealing with that and your social media and maybe a podcast, and not to mention outside interview requests and talking to your sources, and then getting to the ballpark. Let's say for a 7 p.m. game, 3 at the latest, you're getting there. And then it's 4 hours of work of talking to people, cranking out a column at some point with a Post. You had to get that first column in preferably before first pitch, settle in, watch the game. By the end of the fifth inning, when the game is official, as baseball nerds know, 4.5 if the home team is winning, 5 if the visiting team was winning, or if it's tied, that's when my brain would the wheels would start to turn. Like, all right, I need to figure out what column I'm writing here. And then you'd huddle with your teammates. Okay, I'll do this, you do this. And then it's just writing for those 4 innings. Hit the button usually when the game ended, because that's for the next edition of the paper. And then you go down and interview the players and the manager and the coaches and write again. And then you're out the door usually around midnight, home by 12:30 or 1, and wake up at 7 and do it all again.
You talked before, you said something that struck me a little bit ago, just that, I forget the exact word that you used. It wasn't cynical, but like that the fundamental kind of idea was writing something that like arced a little bit negative or critical, or maybe like at least questioning what was going on with the Yankees and the Mets. This was kind of like the task that was before you every single day. I'm curious, like, is that something that you learned to do better over time? Did you always think of yourself as like I don't want to use the word cynical, but like a natural, like kind of person who questioned situations and challenged the status quo? Or were you like this positive, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed kid and teenager who like had to really rethink kind of how I was thinking about this framework?
That's an interesting question, Andrew. I use the word cynical when I was talking about just how I was saying, oh, this garbage, so that not specifically about my column writing, but the job itself. But that's an interesting question. I think I've always been skeptical. And I think that's why I liked journalism. One of the reasons I like journalism so much. My dad, I mentioned Willie Mays was his favorite player. His name is Steve Davidoff. He passed away in 2015. He was a very skeptical person, and he very much believed in fighting the people above you and taking care of the people below you on the food chain. And I tried to emulate him with that and to try to call out power when I thought it was being abused or misused.
That's so interesting. Like, what did that look like in action in your work on a daily basis? What does it look like to have this like healthy level of skepticism and level of questioning of power, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I think that probably illustrated itself best in the daily press conferences, like with the managers. I think I developed a reputation that I'm proud of for asking tough, challenging, but fair questions of the managers, or when the GMs would speak. I don't think I was afraid to ask the tougher questions. And there were times when, other reporters would come up to me and say, thank you for asking that question. Or even officials from other teams. I had an incident go viral with Garrett Cole a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right before I quit in 2021. Yeah. I asked him the sticky stuff. I can't remember the name of the product now, but I just said, have you ever used, that substance? And he was taken aback, and I made amends with him later. And I was told by one of the Yankees people, like, he just didn't think anyone would ask him that directly. So I took pride in that.
You're known around the industry. You're known by people as a relationship-oriented person, someone who has built incredible relationships throughout your career, throughout your life. And in many ways, those relationships have been a huge part of your success and your story as a journalist. I mean, you have this ability to take these little sparks of connection with individuals and then turn them over a long period of time into something more. I'm curious, how do you reconcile these kind of two things of being critical and asking very challenging questions, in addition with your ability to develop these trusted relationships? Because on the surface, those two ideas seem somewhat in conflict.
Yeah, look, I think you can marry those two values by not being personal when you're criticizing people or when you're questioning them, and also by maintaining an open line of communication. My former colleague at the Post, Andrew Marchand, who's now at The Athletic and has his own successful podcast, I always credit him with a line, have the argument before the article comes out, not after, right? So the idea being like, I'll reach out to someone and say, look, I really disagree with what you're doing here, and I'm going to write a critical column. And that led to some unpleasant conversations, but at least that way we could get it out. And then when the piece came out, I could sleep at night. I wasn't anxiously awaiting the angry phone call. And the person pretty much all the time appreciated the heads up as opposed to just picking up, the paper or, more modern, finding it online and seeing it that way.
Ken, you are the author of the new book, 101 Lessons from the Dugout, What Baseball and Softball Can Teach Us About the Game of Life. It's a beautiful book. I've had a chance to read it as someone who loves baseball like I do, and now has 2 young daughters who play softball, and I even coach some softball as well. This book is so spot on. It is so timely. Everybody today is dealing with so many different challenges and complexities and different things that are coming at us from different directions. This book is just such a simple yet articulate way of putting some of these principles from baseball into how we operate in everyday life. I'm so grateful that you wrote this book, and I know that the ripple effect of this book is going to be so powerful over years to come as people start to digest it even more. I'm curious, I love asking authors, tell me about the moment that you knew you had to write this book.
So this book's origin story is a little unconventional in that, so you'll see in the book, my name is actually listed second, which I insisted because my co-author, Harley Rothbart, this book is his baby. He came up with this book. Now, sports fans might be wondering, who in the world is Harley Rothbart?
He's a pediatrician, correct?
A retired pediatrician, actually, and a parenting expert. He's written multiple books about parenting, and he loves sports, coached his kids and grandkids in baseball and softball. So he came up with a concept for this idea. And then we actually have the same literary agent, Small World. Her name is Lisa Leshny. Lisa paired us up just to see if there was any connection there, whether it was helping with a forward or blurbs or what have you. But we got to talking, and Harley said, Ken, why don't you climb aboard? Why don't you take a look at what I've written and put your touch on it with your baseball knowledge, hopefully with your writing skills. And then also, I do have a higher platform than Harley. And I was just so thrilled when I started. I'm pretty sure it was January of 22. So it was right around, I knew by that point I was going to quit, but I don't remember specifically, I told my boss, I definitely had not announced it. But I was like, this seems like such the perfect pivot, because after being so burned out by, what's wrong with the Yankees? They've lost 4 of 6. Write a column about that. Or, who are the Mets going to get in a trade? We need to nail that down. Just to write about the basic joys of the sport itself, of the game, the fundamental tenets of the game, and 90 feet between bases, and how you think through a fielder's choice. And one thing I keep saying is this book is a 0 on the controversy scale. I was just so excited to dig into something like that.
So Garrett Cole's not going to be irritated by this book in any way.
I don't think he is. No, I think he'll like it.
All right, everyone. We'll get back to the conversation momentarily. But first, I want to tell you about my free weekly email newsletter, Tarp Pullers. Each week, I share an uplifting and inspirational tarp pulling story that is sure to brighten your day. And I also highlight some of the most powerful ideas I've learned on my journey talking to 200 and counting of the world's top performers. The newsletter is short, concise, and a reader recently told me this. She said it makes her day every time it hits her inbox. Go to everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter to sign up today. Before Dr. Rothbart came to you with this idea, had you thought deeply about the concept that baseball in many ways is this vector for life lessons, or was that the first time that you had really started to ponder it?
I mean, it's interesting, Andrew. There's no doubt I have learned lessons from baseball just from covering it for 30 years, but I don't know if I explicitly articulated it like that.
So, Ken, the book is broken down beautifully into 101 micro lessons, essentially, from the game of baseball that you can apply both to baseball and softball and life in general. There are some that really just stood out to me, and I want to ask you about some of them. The idea of the starting lineup, and you can make an impact in any role, right? This is like part and parcel to this everybody pulls the tarp mindset that I talk about every single week on this podcast in the conversations with the world's top performers. Talk about that, like that idea and that epiphany that essentially a starting lineup, a team is really an aggregation of a lot of different people, who play a lot of different roles and contribute in a lot of different ways. Talk about that idea. How did you and Dr. Ropart think through that, and what the big idea is there in terms of the starting lineup?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I want to credit Harley, Dr. Ropart, for really coming up, frankly, with all 101. And then, I added my 2 cents on all of them. But yeah, the idea of, so the book starts with chapter 1, just a basic introduction, but then chapter 2 is the starting lineup, because that's how your day begins, right? Am I starting today? And same thing when you go to school, like you got to get a test back. How did that go? So you start your day with adversity if you're not in the starting lineup, or if you're hitting low in the lineup. So I love that. And I can relate from my less than illustrious Little League career, North Edison Little League. I the Twins when I was 15 years old, and Mr. Cupo was the coach, and I was not good enough to start, but like I knew I was coming in the third inning to play right field or left field. And I always remember there was one game where we had a tight win, and I made a good catch in right field, like late in the game, and just the love I got showered with by my teammates, because they knew that I was not the most gifted player, but that I worked hard at it, particularly defense. And so just the joy I brought home that night, even though I didn't start that day. And like, yeah, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. And there are so many ways to contribute to a winning team, as you know, as well as anyone. So yeah, just to take that setback of not being in the starting lineup, but turning it into something positive.
Ken, I'm thinking about a conversation I had recently with Jenna Bainbridge. Jenna currently plays the character of Nessa Rose in Wicked on Broadway. And after our conversation, she brought me and the family backstage after a performance of Wicked one evening. And she said something that I can't stop thinking about, Ken. She told me that when you go to see Wicked on Broadway and you're sitting in the audience, you see about 30 people on the stage over the course of the entire performance. How many people do you think are at the Gershwin Theater every single night with a hand in making the production happen? I'm not talking about the people front of the house that are taking the tickets and cleaning the seats, who are very important as well.
Right.
How many people do you think have a hand in making the performance happen every single night?
That's a great question. I'll go with 100.
It's about 175.
Okay.
There's about 175. So you got the 30 people that you see, and then you have everybody else. And that to me was as like stark of a reminder of this idea that every great thing that we do requires a lot of different hands and a lot of different perspectives. And when I interviewed Mike Richter, he talked about this thing that Mark Messier used to say. He used to describe teams as puzzles. He would say that, like, for a team to succeed, just as the 94 Rangers did, you have to complete the puzzle. And every puzzle piece is going to be a different size, a different shape. Some are really small and some are really big. But without that piece, that small little piece that completes the puzzle, championships don't get won in their case. I just think about that when you talk about that starting lineup, like having that mindset that no matter what you're asked to do, there's a way to contribute and you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Definitely.
Ken, I'm curious, when you think about your career now as a columnist, was there a player or two or a executive or a member of a coaching staff that you feel like really exemplified this in terms of just always being okay with whatever role that they had, almost like exuberant about taking on new challenges and just jumping in wherever they could to help? Does an example come to mind?
Gosh, it's funny, Andrew, what's coming to mind at this very moment is Cody Bellinger, who I really only covered a little bit, but I did see him when he was like 2 years old because his dad, Clay, was on the Yankees, just because I was just listening to my friends Joel Sherman and John Heyman on their podcast, and them talking about Cody Bellinger just does whatever he is asked to do: first base, center field, left field, right field. But yeah, certainly there were players. You know who now comes to mind? Luis Sojo, veteran player with the Yankees on the championship dynasty, 96, 98, 99, 2000. Luis Sojo was just such a chill guy and just brought such positive energy to the team every day. And, like when Derek Jeter would get his 1 day off every 2 months, Sojo would start at shortstop and always would like hit a home run, so he'd have like 3 home runs for the season. But they, the 3 days he filled in for Jeter. And like, he was just so joyful. And it was like, hey, Jeet, you're going to get Wally pipped, which is a reference to Wally Pipp was the guy who sat, and then Lou Gehrig replaced him, and Lou Gehrig wound up playing in over 2,000 consecutive games. So, but then Louis was happy to go weeks without playing, and he would mentor young players and just keep everyone light, joking around. So that's someone who comes to mind.
I remember Todd Zeal telling me a story. he had come up and he essentially took someone's job early in his career. And he talked about that player essentially mentoring him and helping him get comfortable at a position that he wasn't overly familiar with. That ended up really, he credits with really changing the trajectory of that early part of his career. There are so many people out there like that. And I think they're, in many ways, they're the unsung heroes of great teams, great companies, great communities. Ken, so let's talk about the micro lesson on equipment. To me, this idea of equipment and constantly upgrading your equipment and always having like the newest and greatest technology in your hands, this is like a challenge everywhere in life, not just on baseball and softball fields. We're constantly battling this constant need for feeling like we have to upgrade our technology and do the next greatest thing. Instead, I see the world a little bit differently. I see it as you have to always make the most with what you have. Talk about this idea about equipment. Like, what lesson are you trying to impart on young baseball and softball players about kind of how they think about their gear?
Yeah, Andrew, that's really interesting you asked about that one. Yeah, Harley and I talked through that one a lot. And yeah, I think you nailed it. I'm trying to remember now, because remember the craze over torpedo bats?
Yes.
Back at the beginning of the season. I wish I could remember. Pat Murphy, the Brewers manager, had a quote. You had a colorful quote for essentially, it's not the bat, it's the hitter. But he had a more colorful, entertaining way of saying it. But that's what we're going for there. Look, I get it. And look, these companies are making a lot of money. Here's your newest model. I did some writing in these last couple of years for a batting glove company that has really kind of shot up there because the batting gloves are just so soft. So I've dealt with a few different equipment companies just on my writing about them and writing for one of them. But yeah, just so I get it. You give yourself your best chance to succeed, but you can't get wrapped up in it. You can't get wrapped up in, oh, this person has better bat than me, a better glove than me. Like you said, you have to do the best with what you have.
I was also struck by the lesson and idea around like the on-deck circle. I always tell my kids when it comes to softball, and frankly, anything, I mean, in particular with softball, I always tell them, you can learn as much, if not more, about what's going on when you're on the on-deck circle and when you're on the bench than when you're in the batter's box. And that's because, as you know, there's so much you can learn about what the pitcher's doing. Are they wild? Are they around the plate? What types of things is the umpire calling? How are your teammates hitting this particular pitcher? And it reminded me, this idea of the on-deck circle and preparation reminded me of the conversation I had with Ben Zobrist, who, as you know, is arguably one of the most well-known super utility players in the history of the game. He played every single position on the major league field in a major league game, except for catcher. And I'm guessing that if they'd asked him to do that, he would have done it as well. But I asked Ben about his versatility and adaptability, Ken. And what Ben told me was that, like, the first thing that he always says is that he was willing to play any position. Like, he had that willingness, kind of like that positive attitude, like you described moments ago with Luis Sojo.
Right.
And Cody Bellinger. He said, but Andrew, he said, willingness does not get you onto a major league field playing every position. He said, what was interesting was I learned and prepared to play every single position before any coach or front office executive asked me to. Like, he was way ahead of these requests coming in. Hey, that guy got hurt. This guy's struggling. We need you to do this. And over the course of his career, he credits that with giving him that longevity. He says he was never the best player at any one position on any of the major league teams that he was a part of, but because he could do a lot of different things, because he had prepared in advance, he was ready. Talk about this idea of the on-deck circle preparation. What have you learned in your career about preparation? How did you kind of decide to impart that wisdom into the book in that context?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite chapters. I just love the idea of, like, how are you have the benefit of seeing someone else do what you're going to have to do. How are you going to use that benefit? And I also love how easily translatable that is to life, right? Hopefully your second grader gets to a point where she starts to realize, oh, my older sister is my own personal on-deck circle, right? I'm going to get to see her go through all these different walks of life, and I'll take notes mentally. Oh, I'm going to do the way she did it, or maybe I want to try something different from what she did. So that benefit being a younger sibling, right? You always have an on-deck circle. And your older daughter, hopefully she has a friend who's a grade ahead, or maybe a cousin who's a grade ahead, who she can look to as her on-deck circle. So just the opportunity, besides Adam and Eve, we've all had on deck circles of some sorts. We've all had places to look to say, okay, they're going through what I'm about to have to do. So how can I benefit from not being first in line?
I could literally sit here for the next 5 hours and tell you every single thing that you shared in this book was interesting. However, there were some I think that really stood out to me more than others, just kind of how I think about the world. The other one was just small ball. It's one of the other things. It's one of the many things I love about baseball. I mean, I'm one of these people that over the years, I don't know what camp you were in on this or are in on this, but I didn't love all the home runs all the time. Like I tell people, like, one of my favorite plays in baseball is like a Jose Reyes triple back then when he was sprinting around the bases, or first to third or first to home. I hated the shift, and I hated the fact that there was a point where we were getting away from stolen bases. Like, I love those little things. Talk about the small ball. Like, when did you decide that some of these little things becoming a big impact were something that you wanted to emphasize in the storytelling in the book?
Yeah, we could have a 2-hour conversation just about the evolution of baseball, the reliance on home runs, but that'll be for another day. But yeah, I love, I want to specify, like, Harley really came up with the initial chapters, and then we kind of worked them through together. So, but I really love the small ball chapter because I think it's so applicable to life. Like, just build. Don't worry about, like, again, maybe I mentioned the school play earlier. Like, if you can get that lead part, if you're that talented, great. But there's something to be said for starting small, for starting with the 2-line role in the school play and building your way up to the supporting role and then the lead role, and just building up that way. I just think it prepares you so much better than just always swing for home runs. And, with baseball, softball, we can, the game has evolved, and you're in the majority. Most people want to see more balls in play and more stolen bases and triples, and they're trying to figure that out. But yeah, for sure, if you don't have a team that can hit home runs, you're far better off putting the ball in play and getting a bunch of singles and doubles and sacrifice flies and grounders to second with the infield back and all that.
That's interesting, because I feel like for a long time I wasn't in the majority. I was more of a traditionalist, and people loved to see these balls flying out of the ballpark. So they're fun once in a while, but I love, like I said, the first to home, the first to third, the digging in for a triple, getting the front of your uniform shirt dirty. I love that. Hate the shift. Well, anyways, we digress. But on the idea of small ball, it's interesting you talk about the way you framed it up. One of the most popular stories that I've shared since uncovering it on the podcast is about this Team USA shot putter named Michelle Carter. And I know we've got a Winter Olympics upon us here as we're recording this. However, Michelle competed in the Summer Olympics. Ken, her story, I don't know if you're familiar with her story, but she competed in 3 Olympics. 2008, she finished 13th. 2012, she finished 4th. And then in 2016, she won gold. And you talk about that progression. Like, it wasn't, to me, it's not the gold medal that's like the headline part of her story. It's the progression from 13th and not seeing 13th as failure and being willing to come back and being willing to chip away for another 4 years and then getting 4th and not saying, oh my goodness, I got so darn close. If I had only just done one of these things, I would have been on the podium. She told me she saw 13th to 4th as progress, and it reassured her that she was on the right path. And then she won gold in 2016. And I think baseball and softball is a lot like her story. It's like these little building blocks that eventually crescendo to something bigger. Ken, as we get ready to wrap up our conversation, you are always so generous with your time. I've got to ask about the foreword written by David Wright. That immediately caught my attention on the cover of the book. As you mentioned before, I'm a Mets fan. He is arguably the Met that I connect with most of any player that's ever worn the Mets uniform. And part of that is generational and when he kind of came up and succeeded. But it's interesting, like, our stories have some parallels. Nothing to do with our ability on the baseball field, because I was probably much closer to Ken Davidoff on the Little League diamond than David Wright, as you described earlier. But that summer I worked in minor league baseball in Double-A. He was in Double-A, and he came through. And you could tell right away, we had a lot of different players coming in. I was working in Trenton at the AA affiliate at the Yankees for the time. We would see a lot of different players on that roster. We would see a lot of different players coming on the road. And you could just tell very quickly that some people were wired a little bit differently, in terms of the work ethic and the leadership and the way he did the little things just in these road trips that he came into town. And then getting to see him rise so quickly to the success that he had at the major league level, and then sustain that success and continue onward and really become a leader like he did. And then had the chance many, many years later, obviously, to, as I was going through my own back issues, having my own back surgeries at a young age, a much younger age than people are supposed to have back issues, watching him deal with what he was doing, and then having kids at similar times. There are just very few players that I've watched over the course of my career as a fan that I really connected with in the way that I connected with David. And I was just struck by, he's the perfect person to write the forward for this book because he's living this all right now. He's got young kids. He's coaching. If I'm not mistaken, he's coaching one sport for each of his kids.
Yeah, that's correct.
And he's living this right now. I'm curious, as you watched his career unfold, what were some of your big takeaways watching his career? You were much closer to it for a much longer time than I was. What did you take away most from his journey?
Oh my gosh, Andrew. I mean, he did everything right. I mean, it was just amazing. I remember I met him for the first time at the Futures game in Houston in 2004. And he was days away, I believe, from being called up to the Mets for the very first time. And just so humble and gracious. And that, he really didn't change a ton from that day until his last day on the field in 2018, after all the back issues. Just such a consistent human being and just so respectful of everyone. And when we were brainstorming for who could write the forward, I said, I think David would be the right person to do it. He's a girl dad, and I know now he has a son, Brooks.
I think he had two girls first and then a son.
Yes. Yeah. So Brooks, I'm not sure when he was born in this process. But anyhow, we knew he was coaching his own kids. And he very quickly said, yeah, I'll do it. And then even as we talked through the actual forward, I got a greater appreciation for what a perfect fit he was, because you mentioned, he actually uses these very belief system. He told his daughter, who got a tough grade, just how you practice your swing, let's practice your math more. And, you're going to get better at it. So that's why I was just so grateful that he agreed to do this. And yeah, as you said, his reputation is pristine and deservedly so.
I think when I think back on his career, all the way through, from the beginning all the way through that last game, which was very emotional for everybody who was watching, I think what I take away most from his career is the gratitude that he had for everything that he accomplished. You read his memoir that he did with Anthony DiComo, I think it was, and you almost read it like he can't even believe all that had happened. The level of humbleness that he's wired with is just remarkable. And then the gratitude that he had growing up as a Mets fan in Norfolk, Virginia, and then having the opportunity to lead that franchise for so long and become such a part of the fabric, and then have that number retired. You just get a sense, that's the word I keep coming back to. It's a guy with so much gratitude for everything that he accomplished. And Ken, I can't help but thinking about you in the same context. I mean, we talked about it earlier in our conversation, this tremendous gratitude that you had for this period of time. But like David, you got to a point where you just knew that it wasn't going to work anymore. And I think there's so much to be learned from stories like that, where people have reached the pinnacle of their craft and then decide, hey, this isn't for me anymore, or I can't keep doing it this way, and decisively make a change and then take what's next on with all the energy that they put into what was before. And I'm just so grateful, Ken, that we've gotten to know each other over the years. We've gotten to dig into your story now twice. And I'm particularly grateful as a girl dad, as someone who loves baseball and softball, for these ideas that you and Dr. Rothbart are sharing with the world. And once again, I want to recertify you, Ken Davidoff, as a tarp puller, forever a part of the Everybody Pulls the Tarp family. Thank you again for all your time. We'll have to talk again soon. All right, my friend?
Andrew, I really appreciate you having me back on. It's always good to chat.
Always great to chat. We'll talk again soon. Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you're like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Until next time, keep pulling the tarp.